Hello and welcome to a new kind of video to get you the very top grades. I've started experimenting with making quotations memorable by attaching them to a picture. So here we have "look like the innocent flower, but be the serpent under it." Depends on the edition, you might get an apostrophe T there, depending on the Shakespeare you're looking at. And then I'm going to link the quotation to every single essay type that you could possibly get, because I want to show you that this one quotation will fit every essay you could possibly get. And then in this series I'll do that with a range of 10 quotations, so one in each separate video, to show you how you can get your revision down to some key quotations that have all the power to give you the top grades. So the first thing we're going to look at is context. Because at grade 7 I need to link the context to the meaning of the play. Well, we're going to zoom in on this idea of the word of the serpent, which comes straight out of Genesis, which is the first book of the Old Testament of the Bible. And Shakespeare's making this allusion deliberately to give the audience a shorthand for evil, because the serpent is Satan, and the serpent tempted Eve to tempt Adam to eat of the forbidden fruit, and this was the fruit of the knowledge of good and evil. So if we take that to the play, Lady Macbeth is clearly the serpent who is tempting Macbeth, and here she is asking Macbeth to become like her. So she sees herself as the serpent, and she wants Macbeth to become serpent-like, evil, like Satan, as she is. So one interpretation of the context here is Shakespeare is clearly showing the evil nature of Lady Macbeth, and he's linking her to the weird sisters, the witches, and therefore he blames her more in this context for Macbeth's downfall than Macbeth himself. He's arguing that she is the temptress like Eve, and she has caused his downfall. Okay, Mr. Salles, that's great, but what if the question is about Macbeth and Banquo? Then you get an extract that doesn't include Lady Macbeth, and the question is about Macbeth as a powerful character. What do you do then? Brilliant. Well, I go back to that quotation, and I ask myself whether Macbeth is a powerful character here. So the interpretation we just looked at suggested that Lady Macbeth is controlling her husband, and therefore she is more powerful. Then if we follow the trajectory of the characters throughout the play, we see that Lady Macbeth becomes increasingly less powerful, and certainly once Macbeth has had Banquo killed, he stops sleeping with his wife. That's why in the sleepwalking scene Macbeth isn't there, she appears on her own, and he stops confiding in her. He says, "Be innocent of the knowledge, dearest Chuck." He won't tell her that he's going to kill Banquo. And eventually, of course, she commits suicide on her own, apparently abandoned by her husband. So we can read this as a play in which Macbeth becomes increasingly powerful, but in the end, that power turns on him and kills him. The other way we can look at Macbeth's power with this quotation is by thinking of him as like the flower. So he appears innocent, but the flower isn't just an innocent image, it is also a deliberately feminine image. So Lady Macbeth is advising her husband with this quotation to be more feminine, which is ironic because she has just had her speech where she asks the murdering ministers to unsex her and make her more masculine, again showing how she's trying to become more powerful than her husband. Right, let's sample another question which looks like it's going to be about Lady Macbeth. We're looking at the letter that Sir Macbeth wrote to her. And how does Shakespeare present Macbeth as a dangerous character? Well, brilliant. This brings us to the idea of duplicity. Duplicity is where you, in fact, deceive the observer. And we can see clearly that Macbeth is duplicitous. He appears like the welcoming guest who is going to celebrate Duncan's great victory and then murders him in his sleep. He also tries to deceive Banquo. When he asks Banquo, is it far you ride tonight? Goes Fleance with you? But Banquo is not deceived, because Banquo understands the danger that Macbeth is like the serpent. And so he refuses to tell Macbeth where and when he is riding. Now that's really interesting, because when Macbeth has Banquo killed but Fleance escapes, he says, "We have scorched the snake, not killed it." And so he uses this same imagery of the serpent to describe Banquo, because he knows Banquo is an equal match for him. So although Macbeth is powerful, he realizes that Banquo is just as powerful. He is another snake. So yes, Macbeth is dangerous. Now, if we turn to the context idea again, and we bring in the symbolism from Genesis, from the Garden of Eden, we can clearly see that Macbeth is also a dangerous character, in that he brings evil into the world. He is destroying the Eden, which was the political union under King Duncan, and he's destroyed that, taken Scotland away from this paradise that it had with the angelic Duncan, and replacing it with his satanic rule. And you can easily talk about how under his rule Scotland is a victim of assassination and murder, and you can then link that to the way that he slaughters Macduff's family, including his children, which you could say is the very definition of an evil act. And at that stage in the play, Macbeth has indeed become the serpent. Okay, our next question. Macbeth is considering whether to kill Duncan. He has that soliloquy about how wonderful Duncan is, and what a mistake it would be to kill him. And the question says, starting with this extract, how does Shakespeare explore, that should say, the issue of morality? Well, obviously morality is the idea of right and wrong. Well, I've explored that idea quite fully already, but now I can take the context a little further. So Shakespeare now is writing for a Jacobean audience who would have expected a strong Christian message in the play. But I want more than one interpretation. So although this is the language that his audience would have understood and taken as Christian symbolism, something more interesting is happening. So one understanding of the story of Adam and Eve is that their crime in turning against God and disobeying his commandment is what is called original sin. Now, original sin means that because we are all descended from Adam and Eve, we all are born with their sin. Therefore, we are all born much more evil than we are good. We have to be trained to be good. Well, now if we look at the character of Macbeth, we could argue that he's only been a good character because his violence and addiction to killing has prior to this been used to serve the king. So if you look at the description of the battle, where he unseamed the opposing general from the nave to the chops, so literally sliced him open from his belly button up to his chin, we can see a delight in killing. So one interpretation is that Macbeth has always been a psychopathic killer because he has always been born with this original sin. So he doesn't have to become the serpent underneath, he actually is. Or we could take the opposing view and think that actually no, he's just a mixture between good and evil, but Lady Macbeth, when she notices his goodness, his milk of human kindness, decides to get rid of that and make him more evil, more serpent-like. Now, the other great moral dilemma that Shakespeare sets up is he asks whether Macbeth is made to act in any way by the witches, or whether he chooses to act that way. And if we go back to the Christian context of the story of the serpent does not make Eve do anything. He just suggests what will happen if she eats the forbidden fruit. In other words, Eve has complete free will to break God's commandment or to keep it and not to break it. And in this same way, Macbeth has that same choice. He says, "Why then I might be crowned without my stir." In other words, he doesn't have to kill Duncan in order to become king. But he exercises his free will for evil. He chooses to do the evil act in order to get what he wants. And this idea of free will is central to Christian faith at the time. And the whole idea is you need to exercise your free will in order to choose the good and moral choice. Next, we have an extract where Lady Macbeth is talking about to Macbeth about his decision not to kill Duncan. And the question is, exploring the ways that Lady Macbeth is presented as a powerful woman. Well, we've clearly discussed that already, haven't we, in the sense that she emasculates Macbeth. That means she takes away his masculinity by asking him to pretend to be the flower. And she also takes away his masculinity by taking charge. She orders him about. And this quotation is one of those such orders. She's clearly commanding her husband, and he actually obeys. He takes her advice and does become the disguised serpent underneath the flower of hospitality. Next, we have a question about the witches, and I'm hoping you can guess that the question will therefore be about the supernatural. So now I go back to this quotation, which suggests that it might not be the witches who have influenced Macbeth the most. We could argue his wife has influenced him the most. Or we could argue that no, he is born with this original sin and has always been a psychological killer in the service of King Duncan, and actually therefore the witches and his wife don't have much to do with it at all. He is finally expressing his true nature, finally coming out from underneath the flower that he appeared to be before and revealing his true self. Or we can use the quotation another way and say that Lady Macbeth is now choosing this satanic imagery about the serpent because she sees herself as in league with the supernatural forces, the murdering ministers she calls on to unsex her, just as her husband is in league with the supernatural forces of the witches, and therefore this idea of becoming the serpent is not just an indication of his original sin, but also an indication of how the influence of the witches has worked on his mind. So what I'm trying to say there is you can agree that he's affected by the supernatural or totally disagree, but in both cases, this quotation will help you argue both sides. Okay, what if the question is about the theme of guilt? Well, I come back to the quotation, and Lady Macbeth has killed herself because of the great guilt she feels, and we could argue that that guilt begins here, when she advises her husband to be duplicitous and look innocent but become the murderous serpent and killing Duncan. So this quotation, if you like, is the genesis. See what I did there? Because genesis means the birth of it. So this is the genesis of the idea that leads Macbeth to kill Duncan, and she blames herself for planting that seed and for convincing him to become the serpent. Now I can also look at Macbeth. Macbeth does indeed become the serpent in that he kills, and does he feel guilt? I would argue you could easily interpret the play to show that he feels no guilt whatsoever about killing Duncan, and he only starts having his visions of ghosts when he gets his friend killed. He feels guilty only about having Banquo killed, not about having Duncan killed. Or we could even go a step further and say, well, actually it's not guilt that makes him see the ghost of Banquo, it's fear of what Banquo can still do, because Fleance is still alive. In other words, Banquo has beaten Macbeth. Banquo has arranged for that witch's prophecy to come true, that his sons will become kings and Macbeth will die without an heir. So Macbeth perhaps doesn't feel guilty at all, or you could argue that he does have this crisis of guilt, but only in the context of having Banquo killed. So here's another question about Macbeth's inner conflict. Well, that's obviously summarised in this brilliant metaphor, the conflict between innocence and evil, between the flower and the serpent, between choosing to wait in order to become king or taking the moment of history in his hands and assassinating Duncan in order to accelerate his becoming king. So hopefully you can see how versatile this quotation is. I am going to put 2 links in the description to the video now. One link to how you can get hold of this image if you want it, and another link which shows you how to get hold of those extract questions which I found on the internet. So YouTube are now allowing YouTubers to sell merchandise. I've no idea if there's any market for it, but anyway, I'm putting that design on a mug to see if anyone wants to buy it for their teacher. And actually, most of my viewers are adults, so who knows, you might want to buy it for yourself. If you don't, hey, it doesn't matter. It didn't take me long to create, and I enjoyed drawing it. And then there'll be another link to St. Benedict's School, who have produced this PDF for their students and made it available to the world. Big shout out to St. Benedict's, people after my own heart, producing resources for free, just like my videos are. Thank you very much. I hope you enjoyed this series. There are going to be 9 more to come, so do subscribe down here if you would like to, and give me any comments about what you think of the new style of video, because hey, you might love them or you might hate them. I'd love to know which. See you soon on my channel.